And all right, we are recording. All right, we are going to get started. And I'm going to say to our audience here, hello and welcome. I'm Lisa Nielsen, a longtime public school educator and administrator. By long time, I mean more than 2 decades. And I'm the author of several books on education. I have a blog at innovativeeducator.com. And today we bring you just one part of a series of conversations where veteran homeschoolers provide unique insights about what it means for students or children to learn, socialize, and prepare for success in the world without the full support of school. And the goal of this series is to help parents make informed decisions about their children and returning to school or not returning to school during a pandemic. And before we start, I also want to remind parents that whatever decision you make, you don't have to get so anxious about it because you and your family can always change your mind. But if these are things that you might want to try, it might be worth trying something that you haven't thought of before. Topics that we've discussed have included, but what about socialization and socializing? What if my child falls behind? The pandemic slide. Doesn't my child need the structure of school? What if my child wants to play video games all day? And today we are going to discuss one of the biggest misconceptions, which is that working parents can't homeschool. They can. It just takes some creativity. And with us today are 2 parents who know this very well because they've done it. And one of our guests, Laurie Couture, was a contributor of a book that I wrote nearly a decade ago called The Working Home Educator's Guide to Success. And you can sign up to get a free copy of that book at tinyurl.com/free working homeschooler. And I will put that in both the Facebook live stream as well as the YouTube stream. So don't worry about getting that down. I'll be sharing that with you. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our guests. And to start, I'd like each of you to do the following. Introduce yourself, share how many children you homeschooled, the ages they were when you homeschooled, and what type of work that you did when you homeschooled them. And I don't know if you'll be able to say all that as you're introducing yourself, but whichever part you can get to, please go ahead. And we've been starting in alphabetical order, and both of your last names are in the beginning of the alphabet, but Laurie's is first.
Lori.
So unless you start with C for Chris Steele.
Well, that's true. So we could go either way, but if you're ready.
I don't mind going first, either way.
All right.
Go ahead, Lori.
Chris Steele's fabulous. I want to hear from her, but that's okay. So my name is Laurie A. Couture. I unschooled my son Bryson from about maybe, he was placed for adoption at age 11, and right before he turned 12, we began our homeschooling journey, and we unschooled all the way through graduation. And I was a single working parent. I worked as a licensed mental health counselor in a busy clinic out of state. And I also was gigging. I did public speaking, which my son followed me with that. I ran parenting groups. I took a second job running parenting classes, running parenting groups in a parent support program. I also I freelanced as a writer, and I did consulting, and again, the public speaking gigs. So I was willing to wear many hats in order to make it work.
And I do have another question, Laurie. Before you adopted Bryson, what kind of work were you doing?
Well, I was pretty much similar, but I was almost full-time a licensed mental health counselor. I was still doing some freelance writing and a little bit of speaking, but it was mostly the clinical work. I was almost completely doing clinical, and I moved more into the gig economy as Bryson came into my life so that I could be more flexible with my time.
Thank you. Okay, Christelle, let's hear from you.
Thank you. My name is Christelle Gota, and I am a mother of 4 boys. The younger three, my oldest son is already grown up and married and on his own, and he went through conventional schooling. But my three younger ones, we started our homeschool journey back in 2005 when my second son was not successful at first grade. There were some, troubling signs that he was not going to be able to really go through normal school. Things like during a spelling test in first grade, the word was because. And the teacher was standing over my son when she said the word because, and he was supposed to spell it out on his spelling sheet. Well, he just happened to be bored doing it the normal way, so he started with the E and then the S and then spelled it backwards. And because she witnessed that, she marked it wrong on the spelling test. And so he got angry. And then he, lost his temper. So I got called into the office, and the teacher and the administrator, the principal at the time, said, he lost his temper because he got a word wrong on the spelling test. So I look on the spelling test and all these words are spelled correctly. He's like, oh no, the word because he started with the E instead of the B. And I lost it. I sat there, I said, how many of you in this room can spell a word forward and backwards? I mean, I totally understood why my son lost his temper, but that was, of course, not relevant to the discussion. The relevance was that, its situation with him was that he had lost his temper and, talked back to the teacher and tried to leave the classroom, all this other stuff. So that's when I started my homeschool journey. Like many of the parents that are kind of going through this right now, it was under duress. I was desperate for an alternative for my son. I tried special ed classes, but he only got 4 of the 11, autism spectrum, things. So I couldn't put him in a special ed class. So that's when I started looking into homeschooling. And it was actually Laurie's book, Instead of Medicating and Punishing, that just opened my eyes, and my heart and my husband's eyes and heart to homeschooling and the possibilities there. So that's my second son. My third and my fourth son also, we took advantage of what I had learned from that first year in 2006, and we homeschooled them, and they've been homeschooled ever since. So they have never stepped foot in a regular classroom, the two youngest ones. So that's, and the type of work that I do, back when I was, we were pulling my second son out of homeschool, I was a business consultant. So we lived in Las Vegas. So a lot of people would come to Las Vegas to start a new business. So I would consult with them, help them get incorporated, and help them find offices and set up their payroll, that kind of thing. And then about in 2008, 2009, we came back to Los Angeles, and my husband and I took over my father-in-law's medical practice. So we've been doing that ever since. And actually, one of my other jobs is the administrator of a medical practice in Hawaii. So we do quite a bit of traveling between Los Angeles and Hawaii, and we've been doing that in the past 5 years. So I have really 2 full-time jobs, and I'm homeschooling my 3 youngest boys. So I'm able to do it, and we've been very successful thus far. So I want to, help out anyone who's got questions about, how you can do it while you're working.
And how old are your boys now?
Now they're 19, 17, and 13.
Got it. And
Wow.
just interestingly, I also went back and forth from Los Angeles to Las Vegas and back to Los Angeles. So that's funny. I've known you for a long time, and I didn't know we had that in common.
Yeah.
So what I want to have both of you share next is you have, people can't conceive. Whenever I tell people, I know all these amazing homeschooling parents whose kids are doing phenomenally, and they're like, yeah, that's good for the elite who don't have to work, but for the rest of us, no. And I'm like, no, it's not like that. Like, they change their lives around to make this work. So if each of you maybe don't share all of the strategies at once, but like maybe Laurie, then Christelle, like share a strategy kind of maybe back and forth that one strategy that might be helpful for people, and then Christelle could share a strategy and some insights into how you made that work. I think that would be really helpful. So we'll go back to Laurie.
It's funny that we mentioned this because I just did a video when this whole COVID-19 situation started and remote learning was started. I did a video on 9 different ways, strategies that you can work and homeschool as either with 2 working parents or as a single working parent. And I had to borrow from almost all 9 of those to make it work for my son. So it's hard for me to pick one, but I guess I will start with just what we started talking about, is that you have to be willing to work flexible hours or start your own business if you can. So there needs to be some willingness to realize, okay, if my current job situation will not allow me to homeschool, is there a way that, if you do have a spouse at home, is there a way to trade childcare? First of all, you should always look into the family first. Is there a way that 2 people could work at home but different hours, or is there a way that somebody could work outside the home for part of the day and then another person go to work after? If you're a single parent, are you willing to make sacrifices? So for me, I needed to dial back my clinical hours, even though that meant that I was not going to make as much money as I did, as before Bryson came into my life. I had to be willing to look at different options, take other jobs, work fewer hours, and supplement my income in other ways. So one of the things you can do is, can you flex your work hours in any way? Is there a way to be flexible with the current hours you have? And if not, and your spouse or your partner isn't able to fill in that, which I think that in many cases that can be worked out, are you able to start a business? Are you able to pull some other work in, gigging, or completely starting your own business? I know Wendy Priestnitz, her family, they did a family business. They didn't just start a business as the adults, but they had the whole family. They had 2 children working for them. Another tip is a brand new job. Start a new job where or a supplementary job. So maybe you have the current job you have and then supplement that. So I did all of the above. I actually had to do all of those things. So, I had to dial back my hours with my clinical work. I actually started to take clinical work in other clinics. Then I started working for another program where I ran a parenting program with parenting groups. So my son was able to come to those groups and be part of the childcare. I was able to take my son with me when I had meetings. I was on the road a lot. So when I had meetings at different locations, for example, meetings at other programs, I would take my son with me. So there is a lot of flexibility with the job itself. And I think a lot of parents might see their job the way it is now and say, oh, I can't do that. But you can make changes, sometimes drastic changes right away, just by the hours that you work.
Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier, I work for the Department of Education, and prior to the pandemic, there was a chancellor regulation that you could not work remotely. Now that has changed, and I know this is changing for a lot of businesses, and many of our staff at the Department of Education are parents as well, and a lot of them have been able to work flexible hours now. So they would say, well, they're changing, and this is probably something both of you will share, but just from people who are doing this right now, they're letting their kids stay up really late and then wake up really late. So they're working while their kids are asleep from like 8 in the morning till 12. Then they're spending 12 to like 4 with their kids. And then they're going back to work later at maybe like 9 to 12 or something.
I had a situation where we had 1 day a week where I would get up early. I would go to work. Now, remember, I worked out of state. So I would go out of state. I would work, see a few clients, then come back, make lunch, pick up my son. We'd go to his homeschool group that we had on that day. We'd hang out there. Then my son would spend some time at a friend's house after, or the friend would come over to our house, and then I would drive back to work and see more clients until the evening and then come home. And there were times where I was all over the place, interstate, you know. It was worth it. Every minute of it was worth it.
So
Yeah,
Christine,
Lisa,
why don't
you
you?
just you described my day actually. You
Yeah,
because my husband and I work, we manage our practice. So we
yes,
work with the East Coast. We talk to people on the East Coast. So we're up bright and early. And then we kind of make a break in the middle of the day, to spend time with family. And then Hawaii is 3 hours behind us. So that's when I pick up work, 9 p.m. to 12 p.m. So that's our day. And that we've had to kind of live that way for the past few years, and it works out. But what I wanted to point out was that we have to acknowledge and we have to address the fact that people have used public school, as free childcare.
yes,
That can't go unsaid, and there is definitely a value to public school when it comes to it's a safe place, relatively safe place to leave your children while you go to work. You can trust that somebody's watching out for them, that they're at least sheltered and fed. So that is a significant thing for parents to now have to navigate without. So I think if we also just tell parents that childcare is one thing, and then education slash teaching slash schooling can be something else. So in my situation, when my husband and I have to be in a meeting, whether it's at home or at the office, my children are left with my older sister who comes to the house. And then these past couple of years, since my mom died, my dad has come to live with us. So my older sister and my dad now live in the house. So now I
Nice.
have childcare. I have relatives that are watching my children when I'm not in the house. So that's taken care of. Now they are my dad and my sister are not responsible for their schooling or their education. That's me. And what I do that at, what it looks like is different from a normal school day. So I don't have, English class from 8:30 a.m. to 9:30. What'll happen is, because I've got kids in different, at different ages, and they're all project based. So when I'm home and they need help or they need me to take them someplace, that's when we spend time to do it. And sometimes that looks like maybe only 2 days out of the week, and the whole rest of the week they are like in childcare, or they're working on their own and independently. And sometimes my involvement, my husband's involvement is what we call quality connection. Actually, I got that from Laurie's book. It's quality connection. It's not necessarily what people describe as quality time, where you're just spending time, hours, minutes with your child. It's quality connection. Maybe that I'm not engaged with them one-on-one, but maybe they're with me at work and they're watching me in my element. They're watching me, doing my lectures to my staff, because I hold soft skills classes for my staff, because that's my job as a director in my practice. So they're watching me do that, or they're watching me interact with my staff on a report. I'm asking them to fill in certain things in a report, and then we can talk about that afterwards. There's actually a lot of education that happens when your kids are watching you in your element, doing your job. So that's a part of our idea of homeschooling, is that a lot of that education comes from the kids really witnessing us working and being and living life and doing our jobs. And there's a lot of like tracking that happens afterwards. So I do a lot of project tracking, and then that kind of, it looks more like a production, right? Because in conventional school, it's all about production. My kids don't have masses and masses of worksheets that they're done with at the end of the semester or end of a month, but they do have projects. And then a lot of that is done digitally. A lot of it is music. My kids are musicians. So a lot of it looks like that. So it's about maybe putting together a portfolio, that shows what they've done and kind of addressing it that way. But that's our style of homeschooling. So, segmenting childcare from education/schooling should help with that, approaching this in a creative manner for working parents.
That's actually my golden rule. That's actually what I tell people, parents. I always say, for me, I didn't see public school as an option for my son. And because I didn't see it as an option for childcare, I didn't see it as an option, then all of these amazing ideas came out. It took some time to put it together, but it's interesting because pretty much what you described is what Bryson and I did. He would often come to work with me. He actually started to public speak with me. He would come and witness, he would come to conferences with me and listen to this, grad school level professional, material. He was very project based as well. He was a musician, he was an artisan. So everything was very project based. And it seemed like we had, all of the things that he was involved with, because he was involved with different homeschool groups and he was involved with different, he had choral groups and he had chess club and he had all of these different things and activities that he was involved in. And we were able to somehow Tetris it all together with my work, just like you described, Christine. And again, it's that same thing, that golden rule. You can't look at public school as an option. If you look at it as an option for childcare, and I don't, at least from my experience working with schools for, almost 2 decades, working in the schools, I have not seen them as a safe place. I see them as actually dangerous places for children. And about what you described, Christine, that's about all they get is fed and sheltered, in some cases not fed. There were situations where my son was not fed because he wouldn't do his work. Or kids aren't allowed to go to the bathroom, or they're forced to sit sedentary. So it isn't even real childcare, really. It's just somebody corralling your child. So if you don't look at that as an option, what if that's not an option? Then you're going to squeeze out all these amazing ideas with that adrenaline of, oh my gosh, I can't fall back on that. And you're going to get creative like Christine and I, and you're going to find ways that you will incorporate your child into your day-to-day activities. So just like tribal, hunter-gatherer children used to watch what the parents did, they participated or not, and then they went off and did their own project-based, nature-based learning. And that is really what real education is.
Something I hope that's going to come out of this, and I don't know if it will, is just the idea of businesses becoming more flexible as far as letting you take your children to work with you. Because right now in places like where I work, New York City, kids are only going to school 1 to 3 days a week. So what are parents doing on those other days? And if businesses let parents take their kids to work, that could just be super amazing. And I think about like the first step of this, companies like Google let you take your dog to work. And I like that because my little baby's down here and you heard him
Not for
barking.
people with anaphylaxis, that's not a good idea.
Wait, but I do have a hypoallergenic dog.
There's no such thing, just so you know. No such thing as a hyperallergenic dog.
So, but also in my vision, because I've thought a lot about take your dog to work, like there's an area where people, it's kind of like the old smoking on an airplane. Not that that really worked, but there's an area where people who took their dogs, it works at Google. I think they have an area for those people and they're away from the people who are allergic. But aside from that, if we can figure out how to get our dogs to work, we should be able to figure out how to get our kids to work too. And I really hope that companies start to think more about allowing families to take their kids to work. And as we mentioned earlier, allowing those flexible hours, because we've seen during this that these are possibilities. Yes. And businesses really need to be a part of this, and families, well, it's interesting. Families have, especially families I know with younger kids, have said how amazing it has been to be able to connect with their children like this. And they never thought they'd have this opportunity. And then kids are saying when school is returning, they don't want to go back to school.
Yeah.
And families are like, but that's not reality. But the thing is, it can be reality. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
the two of you are ideal people to share ways that it actually is reality.
Absolutely.
Yes, the our company, you know, we've always recognized that childcare has been an issue, and we, you know, our industry is the healthcare industry, and so it is difficult. You know, our nurses cannot bring, you know, right now in the pandemic situation, can't bring their kids to the clinics, but uh, you know, we do have, we're lucky enough that we have a headquarters office that it doesn't see patients. And so, you know, we have um, been looking at the possibility, and, you know, we have a few people that have brought their kids. I brought the kids in. So, you know, you know, that type of flexibility is definitely possible, you know, with lots of companies to do it. But the fact that people can work from home, especially for those that don't have to, you know, put on scrubs and go to a clinic. But if you can work from home, those are that's really kind of that sweet spot, right, where you can start trying homeschooling and all the different, you know, philosophies that go around homeschooling. One of the things that I have talked to with my friends and coworkers that have asked me, just, oh, you're a homeschooling mom, how do you do this? You know, one of the things I try to tell them is we don't do school at home. And that's very important to understand, is that we don't do grades.
Yes.
We don't do, you know, subjects by hour. You know, it's a very different approach to education. It's much more organic. And I really do highly recommend watching Laurie's videos on the 9 different ways to do homeschooling while you're working, and also reading her book, which is the first book, that Instead of Medicating and Punishing, because that whole idea of homeostasis for children and giving a child an opportunity to have homeostasis so that education can happen organically, and that learning can, and really that's really the ideal way for children to learn. It's a whole new way of looking at things. And just like, you know, the pandemic has put us in this situation now that we have to be creative about our day, creative about our childcare, this is the sweet spot. If you can do it, you know, try a little bit, be gentle with yourself, be gentle with your spouse, share with your children, look, we're trying to figure this out. Let's, you know, maybe it's not going to work out this way, but we'll try something else. You know, give each other, be gentle with each other and try some things out, maybe repeat some successes so that you kind of feel confident, and then, you know, maybe try something else. Traveling with your kids, people are like, you're crazy to travel with your kids. Yes, but you know, we did lots of things. We practiced going through TSA. I set up my dining table like a TSA
I
thing,
love it.
and we practiced because my husband and I know what to do. And, you know, you have to take off your shoes, you have to take everything out of your pocket. So we practiced it with the kids so that when we're there at the turnstiles, we're not, you know, stressing out. Not to say that stress doesn't happen. It does happen, but, you know, there's lots and lots of different fun, creative things you can do to prepare for those things. So like when somebody has to go to work and we don't see mom and dad from, you know, 7:30 in the morning to 7:30 at night. Okay, let's figure out, what are you going to do at grandma's house while we're gone? You know, or, you know, maybe we pick Thursday nights when dad and I come home early and we'll do schoolwork then. Or, you know, so there's lots of things you can try. This is a great opportunity to show your kids how you can survive the pandemic. Think of something, you know, find it inside of you. You know, maybe practice saying, I got this, we got this. Practice saying that instead of, oh my gosh, you know, how are we going to do this? Or instead of going to the negative, you know, maybe turn it into a fun little project for the family. Let's list all the different ways that we can, you know, make this work as a family.
Yeah, and another thing that was invaluable to our family was trading childcare with other homeschooling families. So
Yes.
it's a bit of a catch-22 because you have to get involved with homeschool groups before you do that. But once you do, it opens up a whole world. We had a whole system where when I would go to work, my son would go over to one of the friends' houses that was also a homeschooling child, and those parents would watch him. And then when I was home, I would then take them. And sometimes we would we would trade off events like that too. We were running a homeschool group, so I remember we used to take one of the boys while his dad worked, because he had a single dad. So we'd take him to our group, and then when I was done, then I would drop my son and that boy off at the dad's house, who then was home, and then I'd go to work. So we had all these different ways where different homeschool families would trade off the childcare. Also, is there a family member, an extended family member, maybe an aunt or uncle or one of your parents? Do they run a business? Would they welcome having your child there? I think, Christine, that's awesome that the kids get their aunt and their grandpa there. So I know that trading childcare with family members is an excellent idea. Trading childcare with other homeschooling families. Another idea was that we have done was I would time my work schedule with some of the activities Bryson was doing out in the community. Times when he would be occupied with something else. When my son was older, he was able to be independent, maybe have a couple days a week where there was no childcare when he was older and in his teens. However, I caution against parents who just leave their child 5 days a week with no connection. That is not appropriate. It's not homeschooling. The goal should be to increase the amount of time and connection with your child. So when you are not there, trying to balance your child's solitude with their connection with somebody. If you can't be there, there definitely should always be an adult available to your child. So that way, another thing that we did is my son knew that I worked on the hour when I was at the clinic. So when I was at the clinic, he knew, Bryson, my clients run from the top of the hour to 50 minutes of. So he knew he could always call me within that window, that 10, 15-minute window, unless of course it was an emergency, and then he could call the front desk. But that was an important thing, is that he knew he could reach me anytime. And if there was a time he couldn't reach me because maybe, there was something going on and I wasn't available, there was always a family member he could reach if he was alone. And it didn't matter his age, that was the case. So being able to be alone, though, would be contingent upon age, your state's law, maturity. Does your child have any high-risk behaviors, any special needs? Again, I don't advocate for kids to be left alone at any age. I think they really should have that connection. But at the same time, when they're older, balancing some solitude in there is awesome too, because that can also, birth new ideas. My son did a lot of writing when he was during those times when he was alone. But there was always somebody available to him at the pickup of a phone.
I'm also thinking of one of the members of our group, Joanne Tracy, who shared there was a teenager in her community, and I'm thinking just of the power of community, who she ended up turning to work with her son on things that he was interested in. So he was, I'm trying to remember, this was from a while back, I think he was 18 or 19, and he was interested in some topics that her son was interested in, and so they learned together. So even if you don't have a big family or you're not surrounded by family, there might be community members that can be there and be supportive as well. And I just like the idea of thinking local. And with this pandemic, these pod schooling things have come up, which is just like people looking into their community and seeing who can help with what and who has what skills. So, because I do worry about people who think if they don't have family connections, this can't work for them. And I use a term, I think I used it before it was publicly made popular, but I say your family, so your friends who are your family. Think about those people too, because they might be interested. And I'm also thinking of Joanne Tracy, because she knew, like, I think she told me the person who did the repairs in her apartment complex, she said, hey, do you ever want some help? Because my son is into it. He'd like joining you. And so her son helped the person, what is it called, like the maintenance person, I guess, in the building. And so there's just so many people that your child can be with and learn from.
My
That's
son,
how education used to be, right?
yes,
Apprenticeships.
Yeah.
And
my,
there's such
yeah, I was
wonderful
gonna say
ways to
that, yeah.
learn.
My
Yep.
son actually did an apprenticeship. It was really cool with a reflexologist. He was studying that, just that organic learning. He would be studying whatever fancied him, and whatever he was passionate about would then lead into this topic and lead into that. And he started studying body-centered treatments and chi and acupuncture, and it led him to reflexology. And he says, Mom, he says, I want to do an apprenticeship of reflexology. So we found a reflexology who was willing to actually, she wasn't able to obviously allow him to work on clients, but they used me as a guinea pig, and she taught him some stuff and walked him through it. And she allowed him to shadow her. And so are endless opportunities in the community where your child can talk to people doing various jobs that have various careers and learn from people in the community and shadow people in the community. And that can give birth to so many new ideas, so many new opportunities. My son was passionate about so many different things. So he especially music. And because he was so self-directed, one day when I was at work, he got on his bike and he drove a half an hour to, a kind of a smaller city, but a bigger, area than we live in. And he booked himself on the radio when he was 17 years old.
Whoa.
And, and he had the confidence and skill to do it. Another funny story was when my son was 12, one of the first times I left him alone for an extended time. We had tried it out. We had another mom in the neighborhood who was going to be available to him if he needed anything. I come home to check on him in the middle of the day, and he says, Mom, I started a business. And at first you're thinking, isn't that cute? And then he says, and I've already made my first sale. And he showed me the product, and that started the whole thing with him making themes. And he legitimately ran this business from the age of 12 to 15. He ended up selling these little plush creatures he called fiends in local stores. He was in the newspaper twice. So it's amazing what can happen when we give children this freedom. I didn't say, okay, today you're going to learn bookkeeping. You are going to learn how to do the math of how you would run a business. No, he started a business and he sold his first project for only a quarter. And so then I said to him, okay, well, do you think that's sustainable to sell the product for a quarter? And then he sat down and we, priced out the materials, and he says, yeah, that doesn't really work, does it? And I said, well, what would work? And so he sat down and we went to the store together, and I had him price out everything. And I said, well, what do you think would be a fair price? And he tallied it up and he said, well, that price. And I said, well, what about your creative intellectual property? Would that be worth anything?
Is that a value? Mm-hmm.
That's right. Is that a value? So then he added in a creative price. And then he says, okay, Mom, I think $4.50 would be a fair price for a fiends. And I said, I think you're right based on what you've showed me here. And he did that all on his own, not with me telling him to pick up a textbook and we're going to do math now for an hour. That just didn't work with Bryson anyway. Another thing I just want to share is my son really loved Viking history. He went through this period. He was on the spectrum, so the autism spectrum, so he'd get on kicks. And he was on this kick of Vikings. He ended up learning about a game that the Vikings used to play called Nefertafel. It is a defunct game, doesn't exist anymore. But he ended up being determined to learn how Nefertafel was played. He did all this research. He ended up figuring it out. So he created the game board. He made the pieces. He went so far as to oxidize certain pieces so they were different colors than the other metals. So he had this whole production. And then he had a gold piece in the middle. And then we sat down and we played Nefertafel. And I remember just thinking, can you imagine how this could be taught? This would have been butchered in a school. There would have been no passion. He ended up showing me the quintessential way of learning is to just do it. Do what you love. You know?
Yeah.
I was able to have a whole music career, and then what I did is I weaved my work schedule around his music career. At the time, you know, I was working some pretty poor wages so that I could make it work for my son, because I wanted him to be able to gig and to have those gigs that sometimes ran at night. I wanted him to be booked on the radio. I wanted them to have the band practice, and I was the taxi, so I had to make it work. And I wouldn't trade a minute of that for the world. You know, your connection with your child is more important than anything you could be doing at work.
And you
And
know,
that's
I
what
had,
they'll remember. They remember
Yeah.
that no class or subject will ever override those moments when they've spent quality connection time with you in their childhood. You know, that
Absolutely.
is more valuable than any class
Oh,
that
absolutely.
you could give them. Yeah.
and I've heard from so many parents now who have their children overscheduled and whatnot, and we all know about that. And they have said, wow, wait, I didn't need to be doing all of this. It's been just really nice to be with my kids rather than watching someone else be with my kids, you know, rather than me being with my kids. So I think that time is really valuable, and you get to do that now.
It's so
And you can also be
exciting.
free from just the construct of schooling
Yes.
that has kind of really moved away from this organic learning. You know, there's so much testing now. In
Yeah.
California, where we live, we can opt out of testing. So that's, you know, I always encourage parents, especially now during the pandemic, if you can opt out of mandatory testing, that will kind of give you this you know, chance to take a breather from that. Because you know, when all you're doing is trying to learn just enough to pass the test so you can get to the next level, that's not really learning. And that does put so much pressure on parents and kids, especially kids. So if you can kind of get a break from that, or, you know, I don't know, maybe there's a way you can opt out for a year and just see, you know, what that's like. And really, I know you covered the whole pandemic slide thing, but everybody's in the same situation. So, you know, whether you're, you know, a couple chapters behind or a couple of semesters behind, it's really not going to be anything in the end. You know, take it from me. I'm an employer. I have 200 employees, and I have never once hired someone based on their grades, ever. So, so grades, really relax. Don't worry about it so much.
I know. And I was in a, you know, a professional role and job myself, and nobody's ever asked me about my high school grades. You know,
Right.
I thank goodness, because, you know, I messed around in high school, you know, and so I did awesome in college and grad school, honor student, but nobody cares about your junior high grades or your high school grades.
Right.
You know, and there is no such thing as falling behind.
Right.
In what? You know, you can't fall behind at life, because everybody has a blueprint within them to unfold according to. And it's actually school that takes that away from children and creates what we call learning disabilities. No, there's no learning disabled child. Nature doesn't make mistakes. Every child learns according to their own passions, innate interests, their own innate blueprint. And what I was going to say is, it's so exciting right now that these children now who are getting to taste for the first time that there's something outside of school, then they are going to realize when they grow up and have their own children that no, they do not have to put their children into that same oppressive system that their parents did. Because that's a lot of what parents do. They do it. They put their kids in school because they believe they have to. They don't look outside the box, because ironically, the same system that has taught them, you know, that, oh, this is what you have to learn, has caused these parents to believe that they can't educate their own young.
Yeah.
I mean, and yet they want their children to
Ironic.
go to that same system that isn't competent enough for a parent to educate their own young, even though every mammal parent is capable of educating their own young. So, these children, this mostly, the millennials, that most of them are out of school now. There's a few maybe that are in their senior year, but it's mostly Gen Z now that is getting this new way of life. And I think Gen Z is going to make a lot of improvements over the millennials. I've been very worried about the millennial generation, especially the younger ones. And I think the Gen Z kids are really I think they're going to be the ones that really turn things around. And for them to be able to see now that there is an alternative to public school is just going to make that so much better.
And I hope they actually realize that there is, because there's not a long memory of the fact that school was not always something since humans existed.
Right.
If people don't
they don't realize that.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. And some of our brightest minds, we all know, just school was not even for them, like Albert Einstein, and there's tons and tons and tons of people who were considered stupid because they didn't fit into the construct of school. So, so I'm really happy to be able to kind of dispel the myth that if you work, you can't homeschool, with insights from both of you. Are there any final insights either of you want to share before we wrap things up?
I actually, watching your other discussions with the other moms too, I do get questions, because I'm very publicly a homeschool mom in my community. I get asked a lot, what do you do? How do you prove that they're learning? That's really kind of a question I get a lot. And so because we don't do grades, I don't have this but I have in-laws, and the kids have grandparents and aunts and uncles that, that's really kind of the only way they see progress in children, or that your children are successful, is to have these kind of like milestones met. So we do put, little certificates together because we can, that's our freedom to homeschool. So we do that. We put our little certificates together. We put our projects together. So if parents that are working are trying to figure out, well, how do I do this and still prove that kids are learning and having an education, that's definitely something you need to get creative about. You need to look at everything that your child is doing and pull out what you believe people will see as their learning. I've had to show my in-laws, the kids' grandparents, that they are learning math. They may not be able to do an algebraic equation all the way through, but at 14 years old, my kid could run an Excel spreadsheet because he helped to volunteer and do an online auction for me. And really, in today's world, I really need to hire more people who can do Excel spreadsheets, not necessarily algebraic functions. So, those are the perspectives that I'd like to give parents, so that they themselves have this level of confidence that even though it's not regimented, what the 11-year-old or what the 17-year-old is learning in a regular conventional school, that there's so much more happening. And support groups on Facebook and Lisa's group and certainly Laurie's work and her books can open up all these opportunities to see how kids really are getting educated without school.
Absolutely. And play is the work of children. I mean, we need to understand that play is and when I say play, I don't mean video games. I mean real dramatic, with the hands, with the body, outdoor play, indoor play. When children are playing, that is the vehicle that nature intended for children's brains to develop. That is how they learn social skills. That's how they learned intellectually. And that is the case whether they're little or they're in their late teens. Play is the way mammal children learn, and that's no different for humans. It's fun, and so they crave it. And whatever we crave, that's usually what our, naturally, I don't mean, neurotransmitting, hijacking things that we crave, but I mean naturally in a healthy nervous system. Christine, what you were saying about documenting, we used to keep a daily logbook where I would just jot down every day some of the highlights of Bryson's day, maybe some interesting quotes that he said, or a project he did, or people he spoke to, or an event he attended, some things he worked on that day. And then what we would do at the end of the year, we did a portfolio because we had to, every state's different, we had to present either a portfolio or test to a educator at the end of the year to get, basically, a certificate stating that we, met the requirements of the state. So we, the homeschool evaluator at the end of the year used to, oh my God, when they'd see us coming, our portfolio was huge. It doesn't have to be that way, but that was just what we like to do. So we used a lot of photography. We would, get brochures from when we visited places in the community. When my son gigged somewhere, we would take the poster or the handbill and we'd add it. If he drew a picture or he did a project, we'd take a picture of it. If he did do formal math pages, we would take pictures, or we would, of a project, or we would actually photocopy those and put them in. If he decided to use a DVD for his learning, like say something like calculus, he did use a DVD. We included that in there. So whatever you can do to document that, not only for the state, but it makes a wonderful family keepsake. And then later on, if you do need to do a college transcript for your child, you're going to have it all right there, whether they did, that you're going to have your book list, all the stuff they studied, so you can make them a formal transcript for college based on that portfolio.
And I should just throw out, I know both of you know this, but colleges love homeschoolers.
Yes, they do.
So if you want your kid to get into a great school, get a scholarship, homeschooling will make them stand out.
And my son did get a college scholarship. He did do a little bit of college. It wasn't for him, but he just said, you know what, I could do it. He did it well. But he just said, this was just not for me, but for some kids, they do need college to get to whatever goal that they want. And some of these kids, actually, some of the homeschooled kids that we knew were actually taking college classes as young as 14. There was one girl who wanted to be an archaeologist, and she was actually taking archaeology classes and going on archaeological digs at 14 years old. So I think the biggest thing about this is that children, when they're homeschooled, when they're unschooled, they don't need to wait for some hypothetical future to be able to live their life. My son did his music career when he was a kid. Thank goodness, because nobody's guaranteed time.
Well, I think of Billie Eilish.
Have that future.
Billie Eilish and her brother both were unschooled, and they were making amazing music as teenagers.
Yeah.
And a lot of it they attribute to the fact that they had parents who afforded them that ability. And I'm thinking of Amy Milstein. Her daughter had all these different interests, and so she just started college before regular college age and took the classes she was interested in. And you have the freedom to do that. So I know we're approaching the end of our time. I thank you both very much for sharing your insights. I'm sure this is going to help a lot of people. And so with that, I'm going to, well, if you want to say any final thing, please do. Otherwise, I will end our recording.
Just do it. Do it for your kids.
Just do it.
Cherish that time with them.
All right. Thank you. And